Wait, my father said, setting down his fork so hard the silverware rattled. Did she just say $18 million? The room went silent. My cousin still had his phone in his hand, the article glowing on the screen. It says the founder kept a low profile, but, Brenda, that's you, isn't it? Every face at the Christmas table turned toward me. I let out a slow breath. Yes. Ethan laughed, shaking his head. Come on, that's got to be some mistake. It isn't, my cousin replied, scrolling. The company's valuation closed last month, it's all here. The laughter disappeared. Instead of congratulating me, my mother stared as though I'd confessed to hiding a crime. You never told us, she asked. I didn't think it mattered. It mattered enough to keep secret. I wanted my business to stay private. Dad folded his hands together and leaned across the table. Private from your own family. The warmth that had filled the room only seconds earlier evaporated. Christmas music still played softly in the background. Someone had just carved the turkey, and half the family still had food on their plates, but nobody touched another bite. Then my mother said the words that changed the entire night. Ethan has struggled his whole life, you know that, family takes care of family. I felt something sink in my stomach. This wasn't surprise. This wasn't pride. This was heading somewhere I had spent years trying to avoid. I had kept my company, and everything it became, away from my family for one simple reason. I knew that if they ever found out how successful it was, they wouldn't see what I'd built. They would see what they believed they deserved. Unfortunately, I was about to find out just how right I'd been. I was 35 years old, and for as long as I could remember, my parents had described me with one word. Responsible. Whenever Ethan made another bad decision, they would sigh and say, "You're the strong one, Brenda." Whenever I worked overtime, skipped vacations, or paid my own bills without asking for help, they called me independent. It sounded like praise when I was younger. Eventually, I realized it meant something very different. Responsible children weren't rewarded. They were expected to carry everyone else. That expectation had followed me into adulthood, which was why almost no one outside my closest business partners knew what I'd accomplished. Over 12 years, I'd quietly built a software company from a tiny rented office into a business valued at roughly $18 million. There had been no family investors, no loans from my parents, no shortcuts. I had worked nights, weekends, holidays, and countless 18-hour days to make it happen. Keeping it private wasn't about hiding success. It was about protecting peace. Until one article changed everything. My cousin had recognized an old company photo where I appeared in the background. One internet search connected the dots, and within minutes my entire extended family knew exactly who I was. Ethan finally looked up from the phone. Brenda, is this really true? Yes. He blinked several times, still trying to process it. I had no idea. Neither had anyone else. But before another person could congratulate me, my father cleared his throat. This changes things. I looked directly at him. What does it change? He answered without hesitation. It changes what your responsibilities are. I pushed my chair back slightly. Dad, this isn't the time. It absolutely is. Several relatives exchanged uneasy glances. I could already see where this conversation was headed. I just prayed he wouldn't say it in front of everyone. Then my mother nodded toward Ethan. He's always had a harder road than you. I stayed quiet. Dad leaned forward, his expression calm, almost businesslike. So tell us, Brenda, how much of that company are you willing to give your brother? The question hung over the table, like the room had forgotten how to breathe. I looked at my father, then at my mother, before quietly pushing back my chair. Can we talk about this somewhere else? Dad frowned. Why, we're all family. Because this isn't a conversation for the entire room. Mom stood first. Fine. The three of us stepped into the hallway just outside the dining room. Ethan hesitated before following, looking more confused than angry. I lowered my voice. What exactly are you asking me to do? My mother answered without hesitation. You know your brother has always needed more support. I stared at her. I worked through college because you said there wasn't enough money. There wasn't. There was enough to pay Ethan's tuition. His situation was different. I let out a short laugh that carried no humor. It always was. Dad folded his arms. You've always been capable of taking care of yourself. I had to be. And you did, you built something incredible. He nodded once. That's exactly why you can afford to help him now. I shook my head. I built a company, Dad. I'm not handing over ownership because Ethan made different choices. Before Ethan could say anything, Mom cut him off. Listen to yourself, money has changed you. No, I replied evenly. Money let me stop pretending this conversation would never happen. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. I didn't ask for any of this. I know, I said, meeting his eyes. For the first time that evening, I believed him. What I didn't understand was why our parents sounded as though this discussion had been planned long before anyone discovered my company. That thought settled heavily in my mind. Someone or something had convinced them this demand made perfect sense. Dad turned toward the dining room and reached for the door. We're done talking in private, he said firmly. Everyone deserves to hear Brenda's decision. Before I could stop him, he walked back into the dining room. The conversations around the table stopped the moment my father walked back into the dining room. Every head turned toward us. I remained standing near the doorway while my parents returned to their seats as though nothing unusual had happened. Ethan lingered beside me, clearly unsure whether to sit or leave. Dad cleared his throat. Since everyone is already aware of Brenda's success, there's no reason to keep this private. I felt every pair of eyes settle on me again. He continued, Brenda has done very well for herself, and we believe it's only right that she helps her brother. That's what decent families do. An uncomfortable silence followed before my aunt cautiously spoke. Help him how? My mother answered before anyone else could. By giving him part of the company, he deserves the same opportunity she's had. A few relatives exchanged startled glances. My cousin frowned. Giving away part of the company, that's not the same as helping someone. Another uncle nodded slowly. Brenda built that business herself, didn't she? I did, I answered. No one in the family invested in it. I spent 12 years building it from the ground up. Dad dismissed my explanation with a wave of his hand. None of that changes the fact that family should share their blessings. Ethan finally spoke. I never asked for ownership. I know, I replied quietly. He looked at our parents. I didn't ask you to do this either. The room grew even more uneasy. Then my aunt, clearly frustrated, muttered, After everything your parents have already sacrificed trying to save you, I can understand why they're desperate. The words landed like a dropped plate. Ethan turned sharply toward her. What do you mean, save me? She immediately covered her mouth. I thought everyone knew. My parents' faces drained of color. For the first time that night, the questions weren't aimed at me. They were aimed at them. I looked directly at my parents and asked, What exactly have you been trying to save him from? No one answered. My question lingered in the room, while my parents exchanged a quick glance that said far more than words ever could. Ethan looked from one of them to the other. Dad, my father forced a smile. This isn't the place. It became the place when you asked my sister to give me part of her company, Ethan replied. Tell me what Aunt Linda meant. Mom stepped in quickly. We'll talk about it after everyone leaves. No, I said. You wanted this conversation in front of everyone. Let's finish it the same way. The room remained silent. My uncle leaned forward. I've wondered for years how you kept helping Ethan financially. You sold your cabin, then your investment account disappeared. You even refinanced the house, didn't you? Dad's jaw tightened. Those were personal decisions. They weren't personal if you're asking Brenda to fix them, my cousin said. Ethan stared at our parents. You told me selling the cabin was for retirement. Mom looked down at the table without answering. Pieces that had never made sense suddenly started fitting together in my mind. Every holiday, Dad had complained about unexpected expenses. Every birthday, they insisted money was tight. Every time Ethan's newest business struggled, they somehow found another way to keep him afloat. I had assumed they were making difficult choices. Now I wondered how many of those choices had been made because of promises they'd signed behind everyone's back. A distant relative cleared his throat. I heard there were legal notices involving Ethan's last company. I figured it was just a dispute. Ethan shook his head. My lawyer told me we were negotiating. I thought everything was under control. Dad spoke for the first time in nearly a minute. It can still be under control if we handle this privately. He looked directly at me. Brenda, please just help us. I met his eyes. I'm not agreeing to anything until I know exactly what you've done. No one argued. Instead, Ethan noticed a worn leather briefcase resting beside my father's chair. Dad, why did you bring your work bag to Christmas dinner? Before anyone could stop him, he reached down, opened it, and pulled out a thick stack of bank correspondence. His eyes raced across the first page. Then the second. His face turned pale. In a whisper that every person at the table still managed to hear, he looked up and said, "You guaranteed all of my loans." The question shattered whatever remained of the evening. My father closed his eyes for a moment before slowly nodding. "Yes." Ethan looked back at the paperwork, then at our mother. "All of them." She swallowed hard. "We believed each business would be the one that succeeded. You never told me you guaranteed every loan." "You were already under enough pressure," she said softly. "So you decided to hide it from me." Neither of them answered. My father finally spoke. "Every time a lender wanted another guarantee, we signed it. When one business failed, we borrowed to keep the next one alive. We refinanced the house. We cashed out our retirement accounts. We sold the cabin." The room was completely silent. He looked directly at me. "When your company became public, we thought there was finally a way to fix everything." "You thought I'd give Ethan my company," I said. "We thought you'd save your family." I shook my head. "No, you wanted me to erase years of decisions that I didn't make." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "We were trying to protect your brother." Ethan interrupted her. "No." Everyone turned toward him. "You weren't protecting me." His voice cracked. "You were protecting me from the consequences of my own choices." He held up the documents. "If I'd known how much you were risking, I would have shut my last business down months ago." Dad reached toward him. "We only wanted to help. And now you've made Brenda pay for decisions she had nothing to do with." It was the first time that evening Ethan had defended me instead of remaining silent. I took a slow breath. "I love all of you, but I'm not transferring ownership of my company. I'm not signing guarantees. I'm not taking over anyone else's debt." My father lowered his head. "So that's your final answer?" "It is." I paused before continuing. "If everyone is willing to be honest from this point forward, I'll pay for independent financial counseling and help you understand your options. That's all I'm willing to do." My mother looked disappointed. Dad looked defeated. Neither argued. There wasn't anything left to say. Around the table, the reaction was unmistakable. No one criticized me. Instead, relatives began questioning why my parents had hidden the truth for so many years. Several admitted they would have helped find financial advice much earlier if they had known what was happening. Others quietly apologized to me for assuming I was simply refusing to help. Christmas dinner ended long before dessert. People gathered their coats in silence, offering awkward hugs before leaving one by one. Over the months that followed, reality finally caught up with everyone. Ethan filed for bankruptcy and worked through the legal process of restructuring his finances. It was painful, but for the first time he dealt with the consequences honestly instead of allowing someone else to shield him. My parents were forced to sell additional assets and face the obligations they had guaranteed. The retirement they had imagined disappeared, not because of one bad decision, but because of years of refusing to admit the truth. Word spread through the family about what had really happened that Christmas. The story wasn't that Brenda refused to save her brother. It was that our parents had hidden enormous financial risks and expected me to sacrifice everything I'd built to cover them. The trust they once enjoyed within the family never fully returned. As for me, I finally did something I should have done years earlier. I created boundaries. I limited contact until conversations could happen without guilt, manipulation, or demands. My company continued to grow, and for the first time I enjoyed its success without feeling responsible for everyone else's choices. The greatest change wasn't in my bank account. It was in the way I saw myself. I was no longer the responsible child expected to carry everyone else's burdens. I was simply a woman who had earned what she built, and who finally understood that saying no didn't make me selfish. That Christmas ended with my parents realizing my fortune was never the gift they were entitled to, and my freedom was the one thing they could never demand.